Alright, Chapter 3, The Force That Shapes Your Life. Awakening the Giant Within, Anthony Robbins. Chapter 3, The Force That Shapes Your Life. Men live by intervals of reason under the sovereignty of humor and passion. Sir Thomas Browne. So he had been jogging only about 1.5 hours when it happened. So she had only been jogging only 1.5 hours when it happened. Suddenly a dozen young boys began to sprint in her direction, but she had time to realize what was happening. They pounced upon her, pulled her into a bush, began to beat her with a lead pipe. One boy continually kicked her in the face until she bled profusely, then raped and sodomized her and left her for dead. I'm sure you've heard this tragic, unthinkable crime happened in Central Park several years ago when the New York City night happened. It was appalled not only with the savagery of the attack, but even more to hear that who the attackers were. They were children, ages 14 to 17-year-olds, controversial stereotypes that were neither poor nor did they come in abusive families. They were boys from a private school, little league players, kids who took up tuba lessons. These boys were not driven by drugs, nor were they radically motivated. They assaulted and could have killed this 28-year-old woman one reason only, fun. Then they even had a name for what they had set out to do, and they called it wilding. No more than 250 miles away from the national's capital city, the jet airline crashed and taken off at the national airport with a blind snowstorm. It was the Potomac Bridge at the eye of rush hour as traffic snarled and halted. Emergency rescue services were immediately dispatched to the scene. The bridge became a nightmare with the chaos and panic. Firemen and paramedics were overwhelmed by the destruction, dove in again and again into the Potomac to try to save the crash victims. One man repeatedly passed a life preserver to others. He saved many lives, but not his own. By the time the rescue helicopter finally got to him, he had slipped beneath the icy surface of the water. This man gave his life in order to save the complete strangers, which drove him to the place with a high value of other people's lives, people he didn't even know that he was willing to give his own life to process. What makes a person with a good background behave so savagely without remorse while another gives his own life to rescue complete strangers? Will it create a hero, heel, criminal, or contributor? Will it determine the difference in human action? Throughout my life, I have passionately sought out the answer to these questions. One thing is clear to me: human beings are not random creatures. Everything that we do for a reason. We might be unaware of the reason consciously. There are undoubtedly single driving force behind all human behavior. The force impacts every facet of our lives, the relationship, finance, for our bodies and brains. What is the force controlling you even now and continue to do so for the rest of your life? Pain and pleasure. Everything you do, whether you do it out of need or to avoid pain or to desire gain pleasure. So often I hear people talk about changes that they make with their lives, but they cannot get themselves to follow through. They feel frustrated, overwhelmed, even angry with themselves because they know that they need to take action, but they can't get themselves to do it. There's only one elementary reason: they keep trying to change the behavior. What is the effect instead of dealing with it caused behind it? Understanding utilizing force of the pain and pleasure will allow once for all to create with the last changing and improvement that you desire with yourself. Those that care about you fail to understand with the force of the doom of your future, with the living and the reaction like an animal or a machine. Perhaps it sounds completely oversimplification, but think about it. Why don't you do some of the things you should do? After all, what is procrastination? It's well known that you should do something, but you still don't do it. Why not? The answer is simple. At some level that you believe that taking action in this moment it would be more painful than just putting it off. Yeah, have you ever had the experience of putting something off for so long suddenly you felt pleasure just to do it? To get it done, what happened to change your link with the pain and pleasure suddenly, but not taking action became more painful than putting it off. The common occurrence for the many of the Americans experience around April 14th. A man suffers before it's necessary and suffers more than it's necessary. Seneca. What keeps approaching the man and woman of your dreams keeps you starting with a new business you've been playing for the years. Why do you keep the putting off of the diet? Why do you avoid pleading your thesis? Why do you keep avoiding completing your thesis? Why haven't you taken control of the final investment portfolio? What prevents you from doing whatever it takes more life exactly as you've imagined it? Even though you know that all these actions would benefit you, but that could be definitely bring with the pleasure of your life, that you'll fail with the act simply because the moment of the associates more pain doing what's necessary than missing the opportunity. After all, what if the approach of the person and the rejected you, and what tried to start with a new business but failed with the lost security you have within the present job? What do you start with a diet, went through the pain of starving yourself only to gain back a weight back eventually anyway? What if you made investments, lots of money, and so why even try? What if you made an investment and lost your money, so why even try? For most people, the fear of loss is greater than the desire for the gain. Why would you drive more keeping someone stealing from $100,000 you earned over the last 5 years than potentially earning $100,000 in the next 5 years? The fact is, most people would work much harder to hang on to what they have than what they would take a risk necessary to get what they really want from their lives. Secret success is learning how to use pain and pleasure instead of having pain and pleasure to use you. If you do that, you're control of your life. If you don't, your life controls you. Anthony Robbins. Often an interesting question comes up in the discussion of the twin powers of the drivers. What if the people experience the pain yet fail to change? They haven't experienced even enough pain yet. They haven't hit what I call the emotional threshold. Have you ever had a destructive relation finally made the decision of personal power to take an action and change your life? Probably because you hit a level of pain where willing to settle any more experiences these times of their lives. We said, I've had it, never again. This must change now. This is a magical moment. The pain becomes our friend. It drives us to take new action, produce the new results. We become more powerful, compelled to act if at the same moment we begin to anticipate how to change, create with a great detail, pleasure of our lives as well. The process is certainly not limited to relationships, maybe the experience with the threshold with the physical condition you finally fed up with because you couldn't squeeze in the airline seat, you couldn't fit into your clothes, you walking on the set of stairs, when did you finally said I had it and made a decision, motivated the decision, and it was designed to remove the pain from your life and establish pleasure once again. Pleasure of pride, pleasure of comfort, pleasure of self-esteem, pleasure of living life the way you've designed it. Of course, there are many levels of pain and pleasure. For example, the feeling of a sense of humiliation rather than intense with emotional pain. Feeling a sense of inconveniency is also pain, so is boredom. Obviously, some of them have less intensity, but they still factor with the equation of the decision-making. Likewise, pleasure weighs into process. Much of their drive like life comes from our anticipating of the others, to anticipating that our actions will lead to a more compelling future, but that today's work will well be worth the effort with the rewards of pleasure are near. Yet there are many levels of pleasure as well. For example, the pleasure of ecstasy, while most would agree intense and maybe sometimes be overweighed by pleasure and comfort, it also depends on individual perspective. For example, let's say you're on your lunch break and you walk past a park where a Beethoven symphony is playing. Will you stop and listen? It depends, first of all, the meaning of you to associate classical music. When someone would drop anything to be able to listen to the valiant strains of the Erika Symphony, for them, Beethoven equals pure pleasure. For others, however, listening to any kind of classical music is about exciting as watching paint dry. And during the music would equally a measure of pain, so hurry past the park and back to work. But even some people who love the classic music would not decide to stop listening. Maybe to perceive the pain as being late for work outweighs the pleasure that they would get from hearing familiar melodies. Or maybe they have the belief that stopping and enjoying the music in the middle of the afternoon is a wasteful of precious time, and pain doing something frivolous and inappropriate is greater than pleasure the music could bring. Each of our daily lives are filled with these kinds of psychic negations, which are constantly weighing our own proposed actions, impact that they will have upon us. Life's most important lesson. Donald Trump, Mother Teresa are driven to the exact same force. I can't hear saying that. Are you off your rocker, Tony? They couldn't be more different. They absolutely true with the values lie. Opposite ends of the spectrum, they both are driven by pain and pleasure. Their lives have been shaped, but they have learned what to get pleasure from, and what have they learned to create pain. But the most important lesson we've learned in life is what creates pain for us and what creates pleasure. This lesson is different for each of us, therefore, so are our behaviors. What's driven Donald Trump throughout his life? He have learned to achieve the pleasure with having the largest and most expensive yacht, acquiring the most extravagant bill, with making the shrewdest deals, and in short, accumulating the biggest and best toys. What did he learn to link to pain into? In his interviews, he revealed ultimate pain as being the second best with anything. He equates it with failure. In fact, his greatest drive and achieve comes from the compulsion to avoid his pain and is far more powerful motivator than the desire to gain pleasure. The more competent competitors have taken greater joy in the pain of the Trump, the experience of collapse much of the economic empire. Rather judge him or anyone else, include yourself. It might be more valuable understanding what's driving him and to have some compassion on obvious pain. By contrast, look at the Mother Teresa. Her woman who was cared so deeply when she was seeing others people in pain. She also suffered seeing the injustice caste system wounded her. She discovered that when she took an action to help people, their pain disappeared. So did hers. For Mother Teresa, the ultimate meaning of life can be found in one of the most impoverished sections of Calcutta in the City of Joy, with swollen paths for the bursting point of the millions starving and disease from refugee. For her, pleasure might mean wading through the knee-deep muck, sewage, and filth in order to reach a squalid hut, minister to infants and children within the tiny bodies ravaged with cholera and dysentery. She is a powerful, driven by sensation that helps out of the other miseries, helps out of their miseries, helps alleviate her own pain, and helps them experience life in a better way. Given the pleasure, she will feel pleasure. She learned that putting herself on the line for others is the highest good, and it gives her a sense of that her life is a true meaning. While it might be a sketch out of the most of us linking the sub-humility of the Mother Teresa to the materialism of the Donald Trump, it's critical to remember the two individuals shape the destiny based on the link, pain, and pleasure. Certainly, backgrounds and environments played a role of the choice of the ultimate with the making conscious decisions about the reward and punish themselves for it. What do you link pain to, and what do you link pleasure to shape your destiny? One destination has made me a tremendous difference with the quality of my life at the early age. I began to link incredible pleasure to learning. I realized discovering an idea of the strategy that could help me to shape human behavior and emotion could give it the virtual everything I wanted in my life. It could get me out of pain and into pleasure, learning to unlock the secrets behind the actions that could help me become more healthy. I feel better physically, to connect more deeply with the people that I cared about, learning and provide with someone something to give the opportunity to truly contribute to something of the value, but also with all those around me. I offered the sense of the joy and fulfillment. At the same time, I discovered that even more powerful of the pleasure that I achieved in sharing, I'd learned a passionate way, which I began to see, which I could share, helps people increase the quality of their lives, discover the ultimate level of the pleasure of my life purpose of the begin to evolve, where some of the experiences of pain and pleasure have shaped your life, where you've linked pain or pleasure to drugs, for example, that certainly affected your destiny. So have emotions to learn and associate cigarettes, alcohol, relationships, even with the concept of giving in or trust. If the doctor isn't true with it, the decision pursued with the medical career, but there's so many years ago, motivated if you believe that becoming a physician would make you feel good. Even the doctor, if I have talked to, links past massive pleasure to helping people, to stopping pain, healing illness, and saving their lives, often in the private but the respective manner of the society, was an additional motivator. Musicians have dedicated themselves to their art because of the few things that give them the same level of pleasure, and CEOs of the top organizations have learned to link pleasure to making powerful decisions that they have the potential of building something unique and contribute to many people's lives in a lasting way. Think of the limiting pain and pleasure associated with John Belushi, Fred Prince, of the Jimi Hendrix, Elvis Presley, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison. The associated with the drugs escape the quick fix of the way out of the pain, temporarily please the creator of the downfall of the paid ultimate pride for the not directing with their own minds but the emotion. Think of the example they set for millions of fans. I never did learn to consume drugs or alcohol to become I was so brilliant, not because I was very fortunate. And one reason I drank alcohol is that I never drank alcohol as a child, with a couple of people, the family who acted obnoxiously with the drunk and associated with extreme pain with the drinking and the alcohol. But one exactly graphic image I found with the man's best friend's mom. She was extremely obese, weighing 300 pounds, and she drank constantly. When she did, she wanted to hug me and drool all over me. Today, this smell of alcohol on anyone's breath nauseates me. Beer, though, was another story. I was even 11 or 12, but I didn't consider the alcohol drink. I didn't even consider it an alcoholic drink. After all, my dad drank beer and didn't get obnoxious or disgusting. In fact, it seems a little bit more when he had a few beers. Plus, I linked the pleasure to drinking because I wanted just to be like Dad. Would drinking beer really make me look like Dad? No, not because we frequently create false associated with the nervous system, neuro associations as to will create the pain and pleasure of our lives. One day I asked my mom for a brew. She began arguing that it wasn't good for me by trying to convince me when my mind was made up when an observation my father was so clearly contradicted was not going to work. We didn't believe that we don't believe what we hear rather than what we certainly are perception accurate. I was certain that the day of the drinking beer was the next step of the personal growth. Finally, my mom recognized the problem, but just gotta go drinking somewhere else if she didn't give me an experience that I would forget. And at some level that most haven't known, she had to change when I associated beer, so she said, okay, you want to drink a beer and be like Dad, then you've really got to drink beer just like your dad. Well, what does that mean? You've got to drink a whole six-pack and no problem. She said, you've got to drink it right here, but when I took the first sip, I tasted disgusting, nothing like I would anticipate. Of course, I would have admitted at the time, because after all, the pride was on the line. I took a few more sips of finishing one beer, but now really hit full of Mom. She said, now here's another one. Popped it open, and after the third or fourth can, I started feeling the sick of my stomach that shrivelly with a guess what happened next. I threw up all over myself on the kitchen table. That was disgusting, so with cleaning up the mess, immediately linked the smell of the beer with the vomit and with the horrible feelings. I no longer had an intellectual association to drinking with the beer meant, and I never now had emotional association with the nervous system, gut level, the neural association, one that would clearly guide me in future decision result. I never had been a sip of beer since. Can our pain or pleasure linkage with the processional effect in our life? You bet, but the negative neuro associations of the beer effect of my decision in life that influenced me that I hung out within school determined how I learned to get pleasure. And I didn't use the alcohol I used to learn. I used laughter, I used sports, I felt incredible with the help of other people. I became the guy with the school. Everybody came with problem solving. The problems made both of them. Me feel good, something that I haven't changed through those 3 years. I also never used the drugs. In similar experience, when I was in third or fourth grade, the police department came to my school to show me a few films, consequences of getting involved with the drug scene. I watched as people shot up and passed out and spaced out and leaped out of the windows as young people. I associated drug ugliness and death. I never tried them but myself. My good fortune was that the police and them helped me form the painful neuro association, even the idea of using drugs. Therefore, I've never considered the possibility. What can we learn simply of this? I link massive pain with another behavior, emotional pain. Will avoid indulging in all costs when using the understanding of the harness of force of pain and pleasure to change virtually anything in our lives, from the pattern of the procrastination to drug use. How do we do this? Let's say, for example, you want to keep your children off drugs. Time to reach to them before someone else teaches them that false association drugs equal pleasure. By my wife Becky and I decided the most powerful way to make sure our kids would never do use drugs to cover the link massive pain to drugs. We knew that unless we taught them what the drugs really about, someone might convince them that drugs were useful by escaping the pain. To accomplish this task, I called upon our old friend Captain John Rawdon of the Salvation Army for years with the support of John in South Bronx and Brooklyn, helping the street people to make change within their life with the raising standards, changing their limited belief of the developing life cycle. With Becky and I are very proud of the people who've used what we've taught to get with the streets and increase the qualities of their lives. They always used to visit the way of giving something back as a reminder of the fortunate I am. It keeps my feeling appreciative of the life I have the privilege to lead. Also gives me perspective and keeps my life balanced. I explained goals with the Captain John arrangement, the text with the take of the children with the tour would never forget it. They would give it the clear experience with the drug, with the human spirit, with the beginning, with the first hand, with the rat infested, with the rotting, torn, tentum building. The minute we walked in, my children were associated with the stench of the urine-soaked floor, with the assault with the addicts, with the shooting of the heedlessly without who was watching childless prostitutes soliciting passers-by, silent that was neglected, crying children, emotional and mental, emotional, physical devastation. What the kids learned through the link with the drugs that they were. It was 4.5 years ago when while they have all been exposed to the drugs at many times since, that they have never touched them. Probably neural associates and significantly changed with the destiny. That if you're distressed with anything external, pain is not due to the thing in itself, but your own estimate of it, and that you have the power to revoke it at any moment. Alright, we are only the beings of the planet. We've learned to rich internal lives, and it's not the events of the matter to us, but rather how we interpret the events determine how we think about our life and how we act in the future. One thing that makes us so special is the marvelous ability to adapt, transform, manipulate objects, ideally to produce something more pleasing or useful. The foremost among our additive talents is the ability to take the raw experience of our life related to the other experience, create the kaleidoscope, the tapestry of the meaning. There's different from everyone else in the world. One hope only human beings can, for example, change their association with the physical pain with the result of the pleasure and vice versa. Remember, human hunger strike confinement in jail with the fasting with the call, he survived 30 days without food, with the physical pain, with experience, with the considerable offset with the pleasure and validation, drawing the world's attention to his cause. One more personal, everyday level of individuals who follow the intense physical regimes in order to sculpt the body, that have learned to link tremendous feelings of the pleasure and pain, physical exertion, and they have converted the discomfort, discipline into the satisfaction, personal growth. This is why the behavior is consistent as are of the result through the power of the youth of our wills. Then we can weigh the something the physical pain with the starvation again, with the psychic pain surrounding our ideal that we crave with a higher meaning that we can step out of the skinner. We can create higher meaning. We can step out of the Skinner box and take control. But if we fail to direct our own association, pain and pleasure, we live no better than animals or machines, continually reaching our environment. Although whatever comes up at the next determine the direction, quality of our lives, we're back in the box, as if it were a public computer with easy access with lots of amateur programmers. Our behavior, the most conscious, unconscious, is begin with being rigged by pain and pleasure. So many sources of the child, peers, moms, dads, teachers, coaches, movies, television, heroes, and the list goes on. You may or may not precisely when programming condition occurred. It might have been something someone said with an incident at a school, an award-winning sports event, an embarrassing moment, a trade days on the report card, maybe failing grades. All these contribute to who you are today. I cannot emphasize strongly enough that what you link in pain and pleasure will shape your destiny. As you view your own life, they can recall experiences formed in neural associations set forth in motion, but a change of the cause and effects brought to you or in what you are today. What meaning do you attach to these things? On single, do you look upon the marriage wistful with the joy for the adventure of the life mate, or is it dreaded with a heavy ball and chain to sit down with the dinner tonight? Does it consume food matter-of-factly with the opportunity to refuel the body, or do you devour it as a sole source of pleasure? Men, as well as women, much oftener led by their hearts than by their understanding. Though we'd like to deny, but the fact remains with the drive of the behavior, the instinctively relation with the pain and pleasure with the intellectual calculation. Intellectually, we believe that eating chocolate is bad for us, that we still reach for it. Why? Because we're not driven so much by the intellectually now, but rather what we learn to link pain and pleasure with the nervous system. It's over the neural association stop with the nervous system to determine what we'll do. Although we'd like to believe that our intellect really drives it, and that intellect really drives us. In most cases, the emotion and sensations will link into our thoughts and truly drives us. Many times we try to override the system while we stick with the diet, we finally push for the oversolve of the edge of it because there's so much pain while we have solved the problem for the moment, but we have to eliminate the cause of the problem and it will resurface. Ultimately, in order to change we must link pain to an old behavior or pleasure to our new behavior, the condition until consistent. Remember, we will all do more than avoid pain. We will gain with the pleasure going on the diet, overriding the pain with the short term of the pure willpower, with nevertheless simply with the cubs of the wheel settling to give the flattened foods with the first shame of the long term. We've gotten to the link pain with the eating the foods with no longer with even the desire them pleasure to eat more with the foods than to nourish them. People who are fit and healthy believe that nothing tastes as good as the thin feels as they love goods that nourish them. In fact, they often link pleasure to pushing them plate away from the food and still on it, and similar life that they are in control of the life. The truth is, what we can learn to condition our minds, bodies, and emotions to link pain and pleasure whatsoever we choose. By changing the link with pain and pleasure, we will instantly change our lives. With smoking, for example, although most people do is linking enough pain to the smoking, enough of the pleasure to quitting. Your ability to have and to do this right, and we might not exercise the capability of train your body's link of the pressure for the smoking, of the fear that to stop smoking would be painful. Yet if you meet anyone who has stopped, you'll find that this behavior changed one day, the day with the truly change of the smoking meant to them. If you don't have a plan for your life, someone else does. The mission, medicine, avenue, influence, we link pain and pleasure for the advertised with the clink, and understand with the drive of much for the intellect, with the sensation that we link their products. As a result, they becoming experts within learning how to excitation, soothing music, rapid, elegant imagery with the bright and subdued color variety with the other elements put to the certain emotional state that our emotions are at the peak with the sensation are the most with the intense, the flash image with the productive continuously with until they link with the desired feelings. Pepsi employed strategy brilliant in carving out the bigger share of the lucrative soft drink with the market with a major competitor with the Coca-Cola. Pepsi observed the phenomenal success of Michael Jackson, young man who spent an entire life learning how to heighten people's emotion by the way he used his voice, body, and face and gestures. Michael sang and danced in a way that stimulated the huge numbers of people and feeling incredible, so much for they often purchased one of his albums to recreate the feelings. People asked that he will transfer a sensation to our product. The right reason, what if he was associated with the same pleasurable feeling to Pepsi as they did to Michael Jackson? They'd buy Pepsi just as they bought his album. The process for the anchoring of the new feelings of product of the integral and transfer and necessary is basic condition, something learned about in Chapter 6. We study with the science of neurosocial condition, but for the now we consider that any time of the intense emotional state when we are feeling strong sensation of pain and pleasure, anything unique that occurs consistently will become neurologically linked. Therefore, in the future, whenever the unique thing happens, the emotional state will return. You probably heard of Ivan Pavlov, the Russian scientist of the late 19th century that conducted the condition of the response experiment. His most experiments was one which he rang a bell when he offered a food to his dog, thereby stimulating with the dog to salivate, pairing the dog's sensation with the sound of the bell. After repeating the condition enough times, the Pavlov found that merely ringing the bell would cause the dog to salivate, even when the food was no longer being given. What does Pavlov have to do with the Pepsi? First, Pepsi Michael Jackson to get with the peak of the emotional state, with the precious moment of the flash product, with the continuous repetition created with the emotional link with the millions of the Jackson fan. With the truth of the Michael Jackson doesn't even drink Pepsi, he would even hold the empty Pepsi can in his hand on the camera. You might wonder, isn't that company crazy that hired a guy with $50 million to represent them who doesn't even hold the product and tell everybody in the world that what kind of a spokesman he is? What a crazy idea. Actually, the brilliant idea. Sales went through the roof, and so high that LA Gear hired Michael for $20 million to represent their product. And today we've because he's able to change the way people think they would call a state inducer. He and Sony CBS just signed a 10-year recording contract with a reputed to worth more than $1 billion. His ability to change people's emotional states makes him invaluable. What we've given real life is all based on the link of the pleasure, sensation, specific behavior, the idea of the product with like our fantasies, adversity, they taught with the if you drive with the BMW, you're the extraordinary person with exceptional taste. With the drive with the Hyundai, you're intelligent, frugal. If you drive with the Pontiac, you have excitement. If you drive with the Toyota, you're feeling you'll get. We're taught that if you're obsession cologne, you will soon entwine with the rose of the anhydrous orgy, and drinking Pepsi, you would be able to jam MC Hammer, Epto into hip. If you want to be good mom, then the food your child is hosted for the fruit pies and cupcakes and Twinkies. The verses have noted that enough pleasure generated with the consumer are often willing to overlook the fear of pain. The advertising at the age of the sex cells. There's no question of the pleasurable association created with imprint other than TV value for the sex to do the job. Take a look at the trend with the selling blue jeans, the blue jeans anyway they use the work brands. Functional and ugly, how they are sold today, they become an internal icon that everything in sexy fashion over the youthful. They have to watch the Levi's 501 jeans commercial. Can you explain one to me that they make no sense to do? They totally confusing, but at the end of the day, you have a distinct impression that sex took place nearby. Does this type of strategy really sell blue jeans? You bet Levi is number one blue jeans manufacturer in America today. Is the power of condition shaped with the association limited product with the soft drink, automobiles, and blue jeans. Of course, now to take a lowly little raisin, for example. Do you know that 1986 the California Raisin Anniversary Board was expecting a huge harvest, so they're beginning to panic? Year by year, they've seen the sales dropping by 1% annually. The desperation that they tuned to advertising agency and asked them what they could do. The solution was simple. They needed to change the people's feelings about the raisin. For the most people, raisins were considered wimpy, low, lonely, and dull, according to Robert Finney, the former director of the Raisin Board. The task was to clearly pump heavy doses of emotional appeal with a shriveled up fruit with the link of the sensation that people want, shriveled and dried up non-sensation. Most people associate the feeling good about their lives. The raisin grew up The raisins growers kept thinking that we can associate with the raisins that would make people really want to buy them. At the time, the old Motown hit with enjoying the natural resource that I've heard it through the grapevine of the raisin growers thought we can take the sensation that make of the people to feel good with the link of the raisins to make them hip. They hired an innovative animator made with Will Valentin, who then created the 30 clay raisin figures, each of them distinctly personal with a bogey to Motown hit tune. In these moments of the California raisins were born. The first ad of the campaign created an instant sensation, successful link with the sensation of the raisin growers hope for. As people to watch hip little raisins dance, they linked strong feelings of fun, humor, and pleasure for the once with the boring few. But the raisins had been reinvented the essence of the California cool. Outspoken message each of these ads was that they ate them, you had to be hip. The upshot with the raisin industry rescue with a devastating slump in sales of a 20% growth factor annually. The raisin growers had succeeded in changing the association. Instead of linking the boredom to the fruit, consumers had learned to link sensation, excitement, of the fun. Of course, though, using advertising form of conditions not limited to physical product, unfortunately, consistently seeing the television, radio tool for the change of the associate with the candidate of the political profit of no one, but and you know the despair of the master political analysis, opinion shaper Raj allies, who's responsible for creating key elements of Ronald Reagan's successful 1984 campaign with Walter Mondale, who in the 1988 masterminded George Bush's successful campaign against Michael Dukes. Ali's designed and strategy to convey three specifically negative messages with Dukes, and he was soft on defense, environment, and crime, and caused people to link painful concession to him. One portrayed Dukes as a kid playing war in a tank, and another seemed to blame him with the pollution of the Boston Harbor. Most notorious one showed the criminals being released from the Massachusetts jail, throwing the revolving door, played on widespread negative public generated around the country of the William Horton incident. Convicted murderer William Horton released from jail as part of the controversial furlong program in Dukes' home state, failed to return 10 months later, arrested but for terrorizing a young couple, raping the woman, and assaulting the man. Many people took this issue negative focus for these ads. Personally, I found them highly manipulative, but it's hard to argue with this level of success based on the fact that the people do with the boy paying for the game pleasure. Many people don't like the way they campaign with the father. George Bush was one of the people that it was hard to argue with the reality with the pain with a very powerful motivator, shaping people's behaviors. Allies say that negative ads cut with the quicker for the people to tend to pay them more attention to. But these type of ads, people may or may not slow down to look at beautiful pastoral scenes along the highway, but everyone looks at an auto accident, and there's no question of the effectiveness of the Alga's strategy. Bush won clearly majority of the popular vote, but soundly with the trounced Dukes in one of the biggest landslides of electoral college history. For shaping world opinion, consumer the boring buying habits, but also with the same force to shape all our actions. If the opportunity with me, with the take, with the control, with the force, to decide our own actions consciously, because if you don't direct our own thoughts, we would fall under the influence of those who, with the condition of the behavior in the way we desire. Sometimes those actions would have selected in any way, but sometimes not. But the advertisers understood that how to change the way you link the pain and the pleasure with the change with the sensation we associate to their products. If we want to take control of our lives, we must learn to advertise within our own minds. We can do this in a moment of how simple linking pain with the behavior the way wants to stop at such a high level of emotional intensity that we won't consider the behavior any longer. There are things that would never ever do, but the things of the sensation you link to those, and if you link the same feeling and sensation to the behavior that you want to avoid, you'll never do them again either. Then simply look at the pleasure of the new behavior you desire yourself through repetition and emotional intensity. You can condition the behaviors within yourself until they are automatic. So what's the first step of creating a change? The first step is simply become aware of the power of the pain and pleasure exert in every decision. Therefore, every action that we take with our being aware, understand the linkage between ideas, words, image, sounds, and sensation, pain, and pleasure happen constantly. I conceive the pleasures are become avoided with the greater pain, but the consequence pains coveted will they terminate with the greater pleasure. But the problem is most people debate the decision what to do and what's going on in creating pain and pleasure in the short term instead of the long term. Yes, in order to succeed, most things we value require with the must be able to require with the wall of short term and pain with the order to have long term pleasure. You must put aside with the passing moments of the terror of the temptation, focus on what's the most important with the long term, your value, the personal stand with the remember too, with the actual pain with the drives us, but our fear, something will lead to pain of the end is not actual pleasure that drives us, but also our belief that our sense uncertainty somehow takes a certain action will lead to the pleasure, but we're not driven in reality, but with a perception of the reality. Most people focus on how to avoid pain, gain pleasure for the short term, and they create with the long term pain for themselves. Let's consider the example. Some people say someone wants to lose a few extra pounds, but they know that it's never happened, but let's pretend anyway. On the other hand, the person marshal, the host, excellent reason for losing weight, they would feel healthier, the more energetic they would fit with the clothes, the better, but they would feel more confident around with the members of the opposite sex. On the other hand, they are just a man and reasons to avoid losing weight. They had to have to go on a diet. He then continually feel hungry. They have done the urge to eat fattening foods, and besides, why not until after the holidays? With the reasons balanced in this way, many people would tip the scale for the favor of the pattern, with the putting of the things off with the potential pleasure. Some of the burger for the outweigh with the short-term pain. Dietary deprivation, short-term, we avoid with the pain, with the feeling, with the twinge, with the hunger, with instead, we give ourselves the immediate morsel over the pleasure, and indulging with a few potato if it doesn't last long. In the long term, we feel the worse and worse about ourselves, with not to mention the fact that it causes our health to deteriorate. Remember that anything you want to value will require with the breakthrough with the short term and the pain in order to get to the long term pleasure. And if you want a great body, you have to go to sculpt the body, that requires breaking through the short term pain. But once you have the time and enough time for the working out, that'll become with the pleasure of the dieting work the same way. Any type of discipline requires the breaking through with the pain, and discipline with the relation with the personal confidence, with fitness and finance. How do you break through the discomfort, the crave, with the moment? To really accomplish for the aim to start to make for the decision to overcome the we also we can decide with the overcoming the pain with the moment. The better yet is to follow up the continuing or resolve with something we cover in chapter 6. Prime example of how short-term focus can cause us to take all the fall with such of the Niagara, with the reflect with the curve, same with the long crisis, probably with the single the biggest financial mistake ever made. With the history of the government estimate that it should have cost the taxpayers more than $500 billion, yet most of the Americans have no idea what it caused it. The problem would certainly be one of the source of the pain, least economical pain for every man, woman, and child in the country, probably for the generation to come. The conversation that I had with L. William Seidman, chairman of the Resolution Trust Corporation, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, told me we're in the only nation rich enough that survived such a big mistake. We create with the final financial method a classic example of trying to eliminate it by solving the problem with nurturing the cause. It's all being saved with the savings and loan changes that became in the late 70s or early 80s. Banking and the S&L institutions built with their business primarily with the corporate to consumer, the market with the bank of the profit to make loans. But these loans had to be an interesting rate, thus which pays the deposit to the first stage of the problem. When the banks had difficulty with several fronts. First, they were hitting hard on the corporation entered the previously been with the soul of the domain with the bank for the lending. The large companies found with the leading of the one over the state with a significant interest in developing that known with the commercial paper market. This was so successful to virtually destroy the profit centers of the banks. Many banks. Meanwhile, with the new development of the American consumer, the front of the traditional, the consumer that didn't look forward to meeting the loan officer at the bank, meekly asking the loans to purchase the car larger pipelines. I think we can fairly say that we have painful experience from over the subjected to themselves of the financial scrutiny, the dissident, even the feel of the valid customer of the many of the banks of the car companies were smart enough to recognize that the banks began offering loans to the other customers, craving the new sort of the profits for themselves. They saw that they get much money financing as they did on the car they sold, but they could give the customer a great deal of the convenience, the lower interest rate, but the attitude was, of course, quite different from the banks that they had vested in the interest in seeing when the customer gets his loan. Some of the customer came to prefer in-house financing over the traditional method that appreciates the convenience and flexibility of the low financing fee. Everything has included once place the courtesy person who had wanted for the business. The consequently, the General Motors Acceptance Corporation quickly became one of the largest car financing bank companies in the country. One of the last bastions of the bank loan with the real estate market, with the interest rate of the inflation had soared over the 1 year as high as 18%. The result of no one could afford a monthly payment of the servicing loan. The interest rate required, as you can imagine, with the real estate loans dropped off the map. By this time, the banks had lost the corporate consumers with the end map. They had lost the market with a great deal of their car loans. They had begun to lose their homes as loans as well. Final slap to the banks was the deposit of the respond to the inflation needed the high rate of the return, while the banks were still clearing loans that would have yield significant low interest rates. Every day the bank was losing money. They saw several survival to take to decide the two things. First thing, they lowered their standard for the qualifying customers of the loan. Why? Because they believed that if they didn't lower their standard, there would be no one to loan money to. And they didn't loan money. They couldn't profit. They could clearly have pain. If they, however, were able to loan money to someone who paid them back, they had pleasure. Plus, they were very little risk. If they loaned money and the lender did not meet the obligation of the taxpayer, namely you and I, would bail them out anyway. So, final analysis, there was very little pain and tremendous incentive, the risk of their own capital. The banks and the SNL pressure for the Congress to help keep it going under the tree with the chain with the curve of the major bank with the realized that they could loan money to the foreign nations that were desperately for the hungry for the capital lenders realized with the breakfast with the commit more with the $50 million of the country that didn't have to work over the millions of the consumer to loan the same amount of the profits of these large loans where they're sizable. The bank manager for the loan officers were often given them bonus for the relation of the side with the number of loans that they could produce. The banks were no longer focusing on the quality of the loan. Their focus was on whether the country like Brazil could pay the loan back or not. Frankly, that many weren't terribly concerned. Why? They did exactly what they taught them, encouraged them to be gamblers, and with the federal deposit insurance promising that if they won big. If they failed, they would pick up the tab. There was simply too little pain in the scenario of the banker. Smaller banks. We didn't have the resources to have the loan foreign country for the found with the next best thing with the commercial developers in the United States, so lowered their standard with the developers could borrow the money instead of the traditional 20% of the loan with the developers' response. Well, they had nothing on the line, but they were using only of the people's monies. And the same time, the Congress has built such high tax incentive of the commercial building of the builders, absolutely nothing to lose. They no longer had to analyze whether the market was right, whether the building was properly located inside. The developers' only downside was would they have the most incredible tax rate of their lives. As a result, builders were crazy, causing glut of the market with the supply was so much for the greater the demand. The market collapsed. The developers went back to the banks and said, "We can't pay." When the banks turned to the taxpayer and said, "We can't pay," and unfortunately, there was nobody but we concerned with what was the worst people to be for the country. For the assumption now that anyone that was wealthy was taking advantage of must have been taking advantage of somebody. Creating negative attitudes over the many of the businesses were often very people providing jobs allowing the American dream to flourish. The whole mess with the illustrated the lack of the understanding, pain, and pleasure dynamic and advisability trying to conquer the long-term problems with the short-term solutions. Pain and pleasure are also backstage directed for the global drama for year of the life of the escalating with the arm race of the USSR and the two tanks for the constantly building when there are more weapons of the ultimate threat. If you try to hurt us, retaliate, you even worse. And the stands continue to build to the point with the wars in which we were spending $15,000 a second on arms, which caused Gorbachev to suddenly decide to negotiate arms reduction. The answer is pain. He began to associate the massive pain with the idea of trying to compete with the military arms bill, but financially it just was infeasible. It couldn't even feed the people. When people can't eat, they're more concerned about their stomachs than about guns. The more interested filling of the larders within country armament. They begin to believe that money is being spent frivolously, and they insist on change. They did Gorbachev change the position because he was a great guy? Maybe, but one thing is certain, he didn't have a choice. Alright, nature of the place for the mankind, under the government of the two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure for the sovereign. The government will also, and all us we do, with all we say, with all we will think, every effort we make with off their subjection will serve the most demonstrated and confirming Jeremy Bentham. What do people live with an unsatisfying relation with unwilling the earth? They are either to work towards solutions and move on, and because of the now changing, will leave the unknown with the most and believe the unknown will be much more painful than the already experienced. This is to look at the old prophet, the better the devil you know than the devil that you don't know. The bird in the hand is worth the two bush. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bushes. These core beliefs that keep us from taking action that could change our lives. If we want an intimate relationship that we are willing to overcome or if we want an intimate relationship with them, we overcome our fears of rejection, vulnerability, planning with it, going business with it. We must be willing to overcome our fear with losing security to make it happen. In fact, the most things the valuable in our lives require As to go against basic condition of the nervous system, we manage with our fear, with the overriding the precondition of the set of the response of the many capable of transform with the fear into the power. Many times with the fear, with the allowing with its control, with the near. Never become the new reality anyway. With the possible, the painful, the link pain, with the example of flying in an airplane, with it, there's no logical reason for the phobia. They respond with the painful experience within this path, with even the imagined future within. They may have the read with the paper to about with the airplane instant, but now with avoiding getting on planes there, with allowing them to fear with the control. They must make sure that their lives are present with the responding things that are real, not into our fears. What once was, what might someday be. The key thing to remember is not to move away from the real pain, move away from the belief of the lead pain. Let's make some changes right now. First, write down the 4 actions that you need to take. You're putting off. Maybe you need to lose weight. Maybe you need to stop smoking. Maybe you need to communicate with someone you have them falling out with, reconnect with someone when it's important to you. Second, under each of the actions, write down the following question: have I taken an action in the past? What pain have I linked with this action? Answer these questions will have to understand what I have at the back of the associated greater pain with the taking an action, with the not taking. Be honest with yourself with thinking I have no pain with the associated with thinking a little harder. Maybe the pain is simple, but the pain is taking time out of the busy schedule. Third, write down the pleasure that you have of the past of indulging with a negative pattern. For example, if you think of the shit to lose the weight, then what you've continued to eat the whole plans of brownies and bulk size bag of chips, the guzzle, the 12 packs of soda pop to avoid the pain of depriving yourself at the same time that you have the really doing because it makes you feel great or good right now. It gives you play for the instant play for the no one wants to give these up these feelings. In order to change it and create the change from last, we need you to find with a new way with the same pleasure without negative consequences. Identify the pleasure you're getting with what helps you know where your target is. Fourth, write down what the cost if you don't change, but know what will happen if you don't stop eating with much sugar and fat, but it does not stop smoking, what it does not make with a phone call, with the know what you may need to make. If you don't start consistently working out each day, being honest with yourself, what's going to cost you over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what's going to cost you emotionally, what's going to cost you determined in self-image, what will cost you in physical energy level, what will cost you in feeling and self-esteem, what will cost you financially, what will it cost your relationship with the people that you care about the most. How does it make you feel? Does you just say, it will cost me money or I'll be fat? That's not enough. You've got to remember that what drives us are emotions, so associated use of your pain as your friends, that also can drive to the next level of success. The final step is to write down all the pleasure that you receive by taking these actions right now. Make a huge lift to drive the emotional, really get you excited. The real, a real feeling of the being the control life now is in my that I'm charged. I'm gaining a new level of self-confidence, physical visibility, and health. I'll be able to strengthen all my relationships. I'll develop my willpower, which I can use in every other area of my life. My life will be better in all these ways over to the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. By taking this action, I will live my dream and envision all positive impacts both of the present and long term, and encourage you to take the time now to completely exercise, take advantage, great momentum you've been building. You've moved through the book of the Carpe Diem, seize the day. There's no time to like this present. But if you can't wait another second before pressing on to the next chapter, then all means do. But just be sure to come back for the extra exercise later and to demonstrate to yourself the control you have over the twin powers of pain and pleasure. Shopper has also shown again and again that we link pain and pleasure to shape every aspect of our life. We have the power to change these associations, therefore our actions and our destiny. But in order to do this, we must understand belief system that power to create and the power to destroy.